Welcome to Funny They Don't Look Jewish, where Judaism appears in the panels. Our purpose is to find characters, stories, and issues of comics that explore explicitly Jewish content. I'm Henry Bernstein.
I'm Brandon Bernstein.
No relation.
Hey, Henry, it's so good to see you, sooner than usual, but from so far away now.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to top the experience of the last one, having you sitting right next to me. But I think it's good.
There was a really good energy that we were feeding off with each other. It was like the recording process was singing, It was just so quick the whole time.
Yeah, so we're back on Zoom, which is fine, but it is really fine to be talking about comic books again.
Always a love and a pleasure. I feel like every time we do an episode, especially after a break, I get reinvigorated and excited to dive into the world of Judaism and comic books and where they intersect, which is just, all the proof I need to know that this is something that we should be doing, because it always just gets me excited.
Right. Because we like comic books and we like Judaism.
We like comic books. Comic books are great. We like Judaism. Judaism is great. Yeah. We quote from G. Pete is great.
Exactly. Well, it's cool that we'll be continuing a little bit more with Seraph. He kind of came out of nowhere a little bit and hit us last time with, until this point, the greatest moment in explicitly Jewish comic book content. So I'm excited that we've got a little bit more of him.
Yeah, that being, I would imagine, the Kol Nidre at Yom Kippur after crying for repentance. Yeah. It's a pretty high bar when it comes to Jewish content going forward. We're not gonna surpass it this episode.
I don't think so. But no. Set your expectations low, everybody.
Yeah. It'll be. Actually, you really should, because it's not as bad as we're making it out to be. Right. It's all perfectly fine, good Jewish content. And I will say, as we get started again, Henry, there's just something so fun about the way Seraph becomes this recurring backup character. Now, I did not go on a reading binge of the Super Friends comics, nor did I go on a listening binge to your friend's podcast, catching up on all of them. But my understanding, although I cannot verify it, is basically every issue had a backup story starring one of the lesser known members of that sort of wider worldwide league. So that's where you're going to get your samurais and probably your cyborgs from back in this day and things like that. Every one of these issues of Super Friends seems to have a backup starring a different character. Maybe it would be Samurai, maybe it would be Cyborg, maybe it would even be Aquaman, but I think he's too main cast. But we see that the authors like to go back to Seraph quite a few times, because we're actually going to get two more. And on the one hand, maybe that's not too many issues, but this is now going to be 3 issues total in which Seraph stars in a backup story. And it really feels like they're kind of building him as a character.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that was funny was right after I appeared on For All Mankind talking about Seraph, a few weeks later, Rob Kelly wrote to me and he's like, "We just covered Seraph again. He showed up in a backup issue again." And that's what we're going to cover today. So even kind of in real time, 30 years after it happened, it was like, oh, he showed up again. Great. They really like him.
Right. It's sort of like whenever an author, when a writer starts on a book and they have their creator owned characters that they're just really in love with. And so that character always shows up. Right. And then as soon as the next writer comes in, it's like, we don't care. Like Grant Morrison brought in Phantom X and used him a lot in the X-Men, and then the next, Phantom X did not appear again for a decade, it feels like, because no one had anything to do with them. And then also they got popular again, and certain characters are just beloved by certain authors, and clearly E. Nelson Bridwell and, as we're going to find out soon, Bob Oksner had a bit of a love for the Israeli superhuman that reminds us he's not as strong as Hercules. He's as strong as Samson.
Yes. All right. Well, we're looking at Super Friends number 41, December 1980. Dry Earth, Stolen Waters. Written and penciled by Bob Oksner, colored by Jerry Serpe, lettered by John Costanza, and edited by Julius Schwartz.
Is it just me, or does Dry Earth, Stolen Waters sound like it could be the name of a Grateful Dead tune?
Totally. Totally.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's dive in then. So this is Seraph's second backup story, but his fourth appearance, I suppose, based on what we've been looking at in the comics. So Seraph Chaim Levon, once again, is in Israel, and our narrative caption lets us know:
in the desolate wastes bordering the Red Sea, interests try to stop the greening of the desert.
And indeed, this is a story about, quote unquote, the blooming of the desert, as Chaim, in his role as an educator, has taken a group of school children, not, as we'll find out later in the issue, the Israeli school children, but rather a group of visiting American school children. Chaim is a tour guide, more or less, as we'll discover in the next issue also. And Henry, now that I'm thinking of Chaim as a tour guide, like someone that you might get on your birthright trip or just anytime you go, I actually really love the idea of this Israeli superhero who, like, in his civilian identity is just giving all these American Jewish visitors tours of Israel.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a perfect side hustle. I've known many Israelis who are like educators / tour guides over the years. It's
absolutely goes together. So Chaim's taken this group of kids to the most exciting spot in all of Israel, a desalination plant, which is meant to irrigate the desert. And as I hinted at earlier, it's really in line with like this story that you would always hear of how Israelis would like make the desert bloom and would sort of take the Negev desert and really make it irrigable. As they arrive, unfortunately, they are told that their trip has been canceled by a guy who I can only describe as like the sketchiest dude ever. Like every visual clue that I have, my spider sense is tingling to cross universes when I see this guy. Like, do you want to describe him for our listeners?
Yeah, he sort of looks like Mike D when Mike D had the big fro in like 2005 or so, but he just like has this big brown fro, really creepy sunglasses, and yeah, he just looks like a sketchy dude.
He looks like he is a member of the Foot Clan who just walked out of the pages of an old black and white Eastman and Laird Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic. You know what I mean? He's got that sort of like 80s, like, not necessarily punk, but like sketchy dude.
Sketchy guy, yeah.
So Chaim, his spider senses were also tingling as he realizes something's up. So he wants to ask the other people working at the irrigation at the desalination plant what's going on. He doesn't want to make the children worry. So he calls out in Hebrew because none of these American kids know any Hebrew. And so he calls out, Lama hasheket, efo kulam, which of course means, why so quiet? Where is everybody? And correct me if I'm wrong, there's a like little caption translating it for everybody.
It says, cool, why the silence?
Yeah. So much cooler than what I'm used to. I feel like by the time I was reading comics, the contemporary ones when I was a child, they were much more you would see sort of like brackets or I guess like the carets, the greater than, less than on either side, and it would just be like translated from whatever language, and it would just be pure English. Yeah.
Sometimes it's like a fictional language, like I would be reading comics or like translated from Kryptonian or like a made up country, like like DC,
like Kahndaq or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And but sometimes it's just translated from whatever. So it's cool to see. I had the same thought. It was cool to see actually Hebrew written out phonetically.
Yeah, it's written out transliterated. I was going to say my least favorite is probably when a character is speaking an alien language and they decide to depict it in the alien alphabet. So like you literally can't read it. And I'm like, I guess that's cool, but I don't even know how to imagine what this sounds like. Anyway, Chaim is asked, where is everybody? And we get a response from the tower in a kind of metallic voice that just, Kol Beseder. So letting us know everything is fine. But Henry, I suspect that not everything is fine.
Oh no, it is a superhero comic after all.
Indeed. So Seraph consults the wisdom of Solomon's ring. he determines that there's this giant water tower, and he realizes, giant, it's like Goliath. So he decides to be just like David, and he creates a slingshot to take down the water tower, which I guess is cool, right? Like that story, for anyone who's interested, is in 1 Samuel 17. What were we going to say, Henry?
Is Seraph just like the superhero of mixing metaphors? Like it's like every Jewish or every biblical thing. They're just going to mix them all up.
Yeah, he's like, were you a fan of Community, Henry? Did you watch that show?
Yeah.
Do you remember the episode where Chevy Chase's character, where Pierce just constantly works in references to having sex with Eartha Kitt on an airplane bathroom? It's like no matter what they said, he's like, what? It came up organic. That feels like Seraph is like, no matter what happens, he's like, I have a biblical story related to this.
Right.
He's sort of in like youth pastor mode.
Yeah, totally.
Right. Which just to me kind of feels like, oh yeah, that's how you know that this is all of his references are technically Jewish, but also super limited to Tanakh.
I was thinking that too. I was thinking in the last episode also that like all of his references are biblical. There's not, I know we mentioned Talmud Gittin in the last episode, but there's nothing really rabbinic or in it at all.
Yeah. Now,
nothing.
If I were
my mind at the end,
right? There's nothing. It's as though there was the Tanakh and then there was Israel, and that's it. And so if I were to sort of like no prize explain this and attribute meaning that I'm sure is not intended there, I would say, oh, maybe that's sort of fitting for this Israeli character, along with the Israeli narrative of like the diaspora and the rabbinic period was really like sort of an irregularity, an abnormality, a way of putting the Jews outside of the place they were always meant to be. Like there was that sort of thrust in Zionist history, right? Where it's sort of like we were in our land, we were kicked out, and now we're back. And everything that happened from 70 CE to 1948, or like to the years building up to that, is like irrelevant and not important, right? Like all we care about is Jews and their land. Like I could make that argument. I don't really want to, but
right.
Say it.
Yeah. I mean, the rabbinic period literally did happen there also. So
this is true, right?
Under Roman rule, but it was there.
Yeah. Give me my Kabbalah. Give me my spot mystics. Bring in Ramban. Well, the biblical references just keep coming, Henry, because on page 4, there's this like electrical fence, and Seraph leaps over it by using the staff of Moses, and it literally transforms into like a pole vault, right? Like it's a vaulting pole, and he pole vaults over the fence. He has to make sure to let us know the staff of Moses does this.
Right.
And on page
Which is
5,
the only reason we're mentioning it here. It's not just that we thought it was a cool trick.
Yeah. We are not just fans of Seraph's athleticism. They're like, man, he could compete in the Olympics, bring home a gold for Haaretz. So on page 5, that sketchy student reveals that he is indeed a saboteur. He's there to sell secrets and destroy fresh water, and he's all out of fresh water.
He does kind of look like They Live-esque, the way he's holding that machine gun.
A little Roddy Piper like.
Yeah.
But now, oh God, now it's like he's wearing the sunglasses and he's turning against Jews and Israelis. So does that mean he's buying into that anti-Semitic conspiracy of like the Jews are these alien lizard people?
Oh yeah, who knows?
Who knows? So Seraph is horribly offended by this because he wants to make sure that the people working at the desalination plant can keep bringing, quote, new life to an ancient land. He's really hitting those bits hard over and over again. On page 6, we get to like the highlight of the action, the sort of the climax of the action. All the other bad guys have taken those American school children hostage, and they're threatening to kill the children if Seraph stops the bomb that's going to destroy the desalination plant. What a classic hero's dilemma we have here, Henry. Right? It's like, it's taking me back to the ending of Spider-Man where, Green Goblin's like, you must choose the bus of children or Mary Jane, right? Who are you going to save? You're going to stop the bomb or you're going to save these kids?
Right.
And of course, like any good hero, Seraph decides he's going to do both. So he prays
O Holy One, who stopped the sun at Gibeon and halted the moon in the valley of Aichalon, to save lives once again, stop the flow of time.
You may be asking yourself, to save lives again? What do you mean, stop the flow of time? So this is another Tanakh biblical reference to Joshua 10:12, as Joshua is leading the Israelites in their conquest of the land. Gibeon is a large city that has made peace with the Israelites, and so 5 Amorite kings joined together to march on Gibeon and attack and show them what they think of it. And so Joshua is leading the Israelite army, and in verse 12 of Joshua 10, he says, "Stand still, O sun, at Gibeon, O moon in the valley of Aichalon." So literally, basically the text that gets brought over. And sure enough, it's one of those miracles of Tanakh. The sun and the moon stay still, basically like time halts. And so the Israeli army is successful. And so too, it's going to happen here. It's just, I found it funny because it's like the author is clearly cherry picking moments of Tanakh to be able to bring in as like cool things Seraph can do. But he's not really paying much attention to wider context, because just 2 verses later in verse 14, the Tanakh lets us know, neither before nor since has there ever been such a day when the Lord acted on words spoken by a man. It's like, it's literally saying this was a one-time miracle and will never happen again. And then Bob Oksner comes in and is like, yeah, hold my beer. It's going to happen again. Seraph is the exception to this.
Right.
All right. Fine.
Brandon, did you know this reference before you saw it here? Like, how well are you well versed in Joshua? I am not. That's one I think we learned Yoshua my freshman year of high school, maybe. I don't know, maybe 6th grade. I don't remember, 1 year, and so I don't remember anything from it.
Yeah, anyone who views me as a encyclopedic source of wisdom from the Jewish tradition, just like, don't listen for 10 seconds or so. Yeah, no, I am not super familiar. Like, it's funny doing this. There's a process. I forget the name of it, but just like there's the Daf Yomi, where you can over 7.5 years learn Talmud. There is a process of it's basically like Perek Yomi or something like that.
Chapter a day.
Right? Yeah, where you get to basically go through and learn all of Nach, right? Because it's like you get the Torah just by going to shul, but you're able to get all of Nach. I've long thought about doing that because like I really would love a more intentional reading of the entirety of like Judges and Joshua and even like Samuel and Kings. Like, it'd really be useful to go in there more, because I know like highlights from all of them, but I have not studied any of them entirely in depth.
Right.
So yeah, this was, I mean, I think it's cited right within the book. It tells you that this is from Joshua 10. So that made it easy to do my research.
Right. With a Roman numeral 10, even. It was very official.
Right. Very, very official in this sort of way. That's funny. Maybe it's not a 10. Maybe it's from Joshua X. Anyway, the saboteurs start shooting at the children just as Seraph is saying his prayer. Time stops. And Seraph is able to disarm the bomb, to throw the mantle of Elijah over the kids. Time resumes, and of course, the bullets bounce off the mantle, because Elijah's mantle is bulletproof. Why wouldn't it be?
Which chapter of Nach was that, where Elijah, the prophet's mantle, stopped bullets?
This is a dangerous path, Henry. So Seraph then says to them, "Behold, the staff of Moses chastises, especially those who would rob the desert of fresh water." Chaim, we get it, man. We understand. You are pro irrigating this desert. It has come through. On page 8, as Chaim is wrapping everything up, he takes a moment to quote the Bible, and it does literally say the Bible, which, fine, he would call it the Tanakh, surely, but fine, quotes the Bible. And so he quotes from the book of Proverbs, the words that give us our title of this story. "Stolen waters are sweet, ellipses, but the way of transgressors is hard." What's really weird about this quote is you're like, oh, maybe he's skipping like a verse in between. Maybe he's taking the beginning of the verse and the end. No, he is quoting Proverbs 9:17, "Stolen waters are sweet," and then jumping to Proverbs 13:15, "But the way of transgressors is hard." I don't think you can do an ellipses and then skip forward 4 chapters of Tanakh.
I mean, that is the definition of cherry picking verses.
Right.
Like, that is.
Like, I guess you found them in conversation. It's just wild because, like, in 916, right, it says, like, right after it says that stolen waters are sweet, it says, the chasar lev omralo, to one lacking sense, it'll say to them, like, the wider context is, to those devoid of sense, she, meaning like wisdom or temptation, says that stolen waters are sweet and bread eaten furtively is tasty. So, like, in the context of the verse itself, it's already saying no one really thinks this. Like, only fools believe that stolen waters are sweet. Mm-hmm. But he kept it to be able, right? Like Oksner kept it to make the flip to the way of transgressors is hard. That being Proverbs 13:15, and I was going to go deep into some stuff there, but it's really not so relevant. So I'm going to skip over it. If people are interested in learning things about the word hard and where it got translated from Proverbs 13:15, at me. I'll tell you outside of this podcast. So afterwards, Chaim's with the kids. We may recall he doesn't really care about having a secret identity, so they're probably aware that he's Seraph, but they don't seem fazed by it. But they ask, how could time have stopped without throwing the Earth off its orbit? Right? Was this a miracle? And I think this is probably our favorite part of the issue, Henry.
Yeah.
What does Chaim say in response to these kids asking if it was a miracle?
Kids, almost 2,000 years ago, a Jewish historian said, on the matter of miracles, everyone is welcome to his own opinion. So what do you think?
Love it. Love that open, discursive, didactic education. So as the citation lets us know, as the editor's note lets us know, Chaim is quoting Josephus, the Jewish historian. In his Antiquities, he had this quote. I'm sure you can Google it and see it all sorts of places. On the matter of miracles, everyone is welcome to their own opinion. But that's the end of the issue. So we get like some Jewish history, right? Which also feels like, again, feels very Christian when the only Jewish things you're quoting are like Tanakh and Josephus.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's just keep going. What's our next issue, Henry?
We are staying in the cartoon universe of Super Friends, number 46, April 1981, Echo of Evil, written and penciled by Bob Oksner, colored by Jerry Serpe, lettered by John Costanza, edited by Julius Schwartz.
I'm going to describe this first page and then tell a little quick thing, which is we have a caption letting us know, like a ship of stone, the great rock fortress soars 1,300 feet above the eastern Judean desert. And we see that we are at Masada. Chaim is at Masada to give a tour. Once again, he's a great tour guide. To Rivka, you may remember Rivka from the Day of Atonement, and her American cousin
Rivka, who is thigh or posterior Chaim lifted up over his head.
Yeah. That Rivka, the one that Seraph is probably hooking up with on the regular, and her American cousin Wendy, who also, very well might have a crush on Chaim. Who knows? They're all getting along splendidly. But so what's wild about this, Henry, is we're basically going to get an issue that dives deep into the history of Masada. And if you don't know the history of Masada, you'll learn it shortly because we're going to share it with you via this issue. But if you've ever been on an organized trip to Israel, you know that almost every birthright group, almost all the tour groups will go at some point to Masada, right? Like you will climb Masada, the sunrise hike, right? The hike to climb up and see the sunrise at Masada is sort of like a known tourist thing to do. So what's crazy about this is that about 4 months ago in early January, I was leading a birthright trip. I was in Israel when you first messaged me, Henry, about Seraph. So like, Chatanu, Lifanechem, listeners, we've sinned by staying on this for so many months. But we found out about Seraph in January, and we started diving in and finding all the issues we could that had Jewish content. And I literally found this issue and started going through it and discovering that it was about Masada on our bus ride to Masada. I'm like literally like we woke up early, we stayed in Bedouin tents, we woke up early, and I'm like messaging you on WhatsApp and looking through the phone and like reading these passages and being like, oh my gosh, like we're doing that. The same, like it was just wild for me to encounter an issue of Jewish content, and that Jewish content was the same thing I was doing that very day. It was a really cool experience.
That's incredible. What are the chances?
Right?
It's not like you go to Masada all the time.
Right? Like literally, so it's 2023. I led a birthright trip. And before that, the last time I was in Israel was 2015. Right? It's like I hadn't been to Israel in 8 years. And then on the trip that I'm back is when we discover this comic book about an Israeli superhero that they go to. It was wild. So on page 2, Chaim gives a brief review of Masada's history. He lets us know that it was built by Herod as a, quote, pleasure palace, which I can only assume it means it's a place where Chaim could lift up Rivka as many times as he wants. And Chaim then describes the Roman sacking of Jerusalem in the year 70, the destruction of the temple, and that the last fighters resisting the Roman army resisted out of Masada. And they sort of laid up there and were living in Masada until Flavius Silva marched the 10th Roman Legion in the siege of Masada, breaching there, expecting to engage in combat, only to discover that 916 men, women, and children were all already dead, that they had all killed themselves. This being a version of the story found in Josephus, once again, our Jewish historian of the Roman era. Wendy, the American cousin, refers to the fact that all the men, women, and children dead as being very much like Patrick Henry, because she has her very American perspective. But right, like we have the story basically as Josephus puts it, as my tour guide said literally that day on Masada, and as much modern scholarship says, people are pretty suspect of how accurate Josephus is, especially around this story. I think Josephus ends up like literally giving the speech that they gave at Masada, encouraging everyone to take their own lives, which obviously how could you have that if they all killed themselves? So like, I think what I was told is whenever you hear a number from Josephus, you should probably take at least 1 0 away from it. Meaning if it's 960 people, like maybe 96 people died, right? But like he's known to exaggerate. There's a lot of uncertainty as to whether or not it's accurate, but that is certainly the story, and Chaim is telling the story.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I learned the same thing many times. It might have or not been accurate. Yeah,
and look, Masada's like, it can be a really difficult place. I think for some people, it's this spot of like self-determination and sort of like Kiddush Hashem in a way, and like taking your life into your own hands and refusing to die at the enemy's hands. And then others view it as like, but it's a mass suicide and it's so difficult. Anyway, so like Masada can be a difficult topic for people, but they're there. And on page 3, as Chaim's just looking around at the well-preserved Roman camps, suddenly they are a little too well-preserved and they come to life, like he's having some sort of illusion. And what ends up happening is literally like the Roman siege is reappearing and happening in real time. And on page 5, Seraph confronts the ghost of Flavius Silva, the Roman soldier, who, says like they had captured all of Judea except for Masada. Masada was the one piece they still needed to conquer, and that tomorrow, within the comic, is the anniversary of the breach of Masada.
What are the chances?
Oh, you think that is rare odds, Henry? Tomorrow, 960 American tourists will be present. The exact number of dead found there. Again, according to Josephus. And so the plan is like, I guess Flavius Silva's ghost plan is like, an opportunity for me to kill 960 Jews instead of them killing themselves. Comics sometimes, right? Like things you never thought you would say. So they get into a fight. On page 7, Seraph is attacking with all the strength of Samson, and Flavius Silva asks for compassion. Seraph yields. We're so proud of our boy.
Yeah, he learned something.
He learned, he's grown since the Day of Atonement. He doesn't want to lose his powers again. But Silva was trying to lure Seraph into ease, and then he strikes with lightning.
He was playing possum a little bit.
He's playing possum, and it basically kills Seraph. Like, Seraph appears to be dead, but Moses' staff is not dead. Moses' staff starts to give a little wriggle, because we all know what Moses' staff loves to do. What's it love to do, Henry?
Turn into snakes.
It loves to turn into snakes, or as this comic tells us on page 8, it loves to turn into the serpent of eternal death. Sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. It's possible that the serpent of eternal death is just a really, like, heavy metal band name for the Garden of Eden, the snake in the Garden of Eden. It's possible that it's just a reference for Moses' staff as described when confronting Pharaoh and Pharaoh's magicians, turning into a snake. And it could be a reference to the burning serpents in the book of Numbers. There's like an episode that's sort of alluded to of these snakes attacking the people. So,
but it's probably just the snake from Exodus, right?
Yes, I would assume so.
Since it's hit Moses' staff, since they've said he's hitting us over the head with it, that it's Moses' staff.
I'm assuming it has to be the serpent of eternal death because he's already a ghost. So then it's like, no, this is death for real. This is eternal death. Anyway, the snake bites Flavius Silva's ghost. The ghost dies. Seraph comes back to life. He claims that he came back to life because of the mantle of Elijah, because we got to end with one last Tanakh reference. What is Seraph's explanation, Henry, on page 8 of why he came back to life?
After all, if Elijah, by the Lord's power, restored life to a widow's dead son, surely he'd do the same for the one who inherited his clothes. What?
I like to imagine that Wendy and Rivka are both like, who said anything about a widow's dead son? What are you talking about?
Like, where did Bob Oksner even come up with that dialogue?
Yeah, it's, I don't know. But if any of you listening are wondering, this is a reference to 1 Kings 17:22, in which indeed a widow has a son who has died, and Elijah resurrects this kid. And so Chaim seems to think that the mantle, whoever it gets passed down to, can also be resurrected. I don't know. It's really weird logic. Like, clearly it worked once. Why wouldn't it work again? I guess so. Chaim then jokes that he'll be able to tell the story of Masada as though he lived it himself. Ha 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 ha.
Great.
That's the end of the issue. You can really tell the difference between the Jewish content in an E. Nelson Bridwell penned Seraph story and a Bob Oksner one. Like, Bob's just like, he's trying his best, but I'm not feeling it so much.
Yeah, he sort of has got the obscure biblical references, but some of them are sort of like, well, why? It doesn't flow quite as well as E. Nelson Bridwell, or seem to make sense as well.
Yeah, like, what do you think came first? Do you think he came up with cool things that Seraph could do and then was like, I need to find a biblical connection for it? Or was he like talking to E. Nelson and being like, tell me cool things that happen in the Bible, like what cool miracles are there? And then he's like, well, Joshua once like prayed for time. So, oh yeah, I'll include that, right? Like,
I think I have a feeling it was the first one. I think E. Nelson Bridwell sort of served as that guy in the office, from what I understand, that like when the guys were all writing in those days, and they needed a reference to something, they would ask him. That's the sense I get.
Right.
For DC continuity also.
Right.
It's like, hey, so. Whatever they called E. Nelson. Hey, yo, E.
Right.
What's a good power for Seraph that'll for this particular situation? Yeah.
I guess so. By the way, lest we receive a message from someone, I know that we have said multiple times, like, it feels very Christian, but I guess we should point out that Bob Oksner actually was Jewish. So this is a Jewish author, but it's just a Jewish author who doesn't seem to have a strong grasp on like like he's either really writing for a Christian audience in his approach, or he does not have much of a strong grasp of like Jewish religious practice outside of Tanakh.
Yeah, and I mean, and we've talked about that kind of thing going way back to our, early episodes about Jewish writers who write like that. So,
absolutely.
Nothing new.
All right. Our last main issue that we're looking at today, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, we're leaving the DC animated universe behind.
Yeah, so I'm really glad you pointed that out, because going back to last episode, I was thinking, how you kept talking. We made a couple like conundrums, and you sort of explained it, that this is in the cartoon continuity, the Super Friends continuity, whatever. And I was thinking, I didn't say it last time because I didn't want to spoil what we were going to be covering. But now we're in actual DC Comics pre-crisis continuity, because we're looking at DC Comics Presents, which was a series with current DC heroes teaming up, basically, often. And so it was usually DC Comics Presents was usually a Superman team up book. So we're in the real like DC universe now. Seraph is real.
He's a real boy.
So we're looking at DC Comics Presents number 46, June 1982, The Wizard Who Wouldn't Stay Dead, written by E. Nelson Bridwell, penciled by Alex Saviuk, inked by Pablo Marcos, colored by Gene D'Angelo, lettered by John Costanza, and edited by Julius Schwartz.
I assume that because E. Nelson had already had the history of working on this character in Super Friends, that's why he decided, like, hey, I'm going to pull him over into actual, I guess Earth 2 is what it would be.
This is Earth 1. This is still Earth
pre-crisis
1.
is Earth 1. Yeah.
Earth 2 were like the Golden Age heroes in pre-crisis. So Earth, I know it doesn't make sense, but so at a certain point, the 1940s heroes became part of Earth 2, and Superman, Batman, Aquaman, Green Lantern. At a certain point in the 1950s, they meet their Earth 2 counterparts, and it's all those heroes like Superman and Batman and Robin, and but then some other ones like Wildcat and Hourman and whatever. So this is still during that period of time where there's a multiverse. This is pre-1985 Crisis on Infinite Earths.
All right. So as we dive in, basically there's a hodgepodge of random supervillains that are attempting to raise an evil sorcerer from the dead. That's the superhero backdrop that we need to have. And this is a team up of Superman and the Global Guardians. Before we go any further, Henry, is there anything you want to add about the Global Guardians and who they are? Does it matter?
No, just an international team of, heroes representing different countries and cultures, and
yes,
to a certain extent, ethnicities. I don't.
Would you say the UN of superhero teams,
sure,
or the EU of superhero teams?
Either one would be generous.
Oh, okay. Got it. This is a real.
I think the Global Guardians, to a certain generation of DC comic fans, have a nostalgia for. Like, I think people who grew up watching Super Friends and reading these Super Friends comics, reading comics in the 70s and 80s, have a soft spot for the Golden Guardians. Not for me. So,
because there's like Justice League International, which is the Justice League also on an international global scale. So
yes, but the Justice League International,
the JLI has more heavy hitters. Is that the deal? Or
well, sort of, except they have like Flash and Power Girl, but they also have like Crimson Fox and Rocket Red. There's also, that's a whole part there. JLI is there's all tied up with JLE, Justice League Europe. So it's a different thing. The Global Guardians, I think, they're like, I would say more like the UN, that there's like a hero on the Global Guardians that represents a different country but it's also like culture and language and a little bit of ethnic stuff too. So it like represents that. Whereas Justice League International and Justice League Europe was just the Justice League was working in Europe for a while and did have a few more international heroes, like I mentioned, like Crimson Fox, who was French, and Rocket Red, who was Russian, but it's different.
Got it. It reminds me of when I was in high school history class, and for whatever reason, sometimes as we were learning about like World War I or World War II, I would imagine each country not as a full nation with an army, but as a superhero or supervillain character from that country. And just, right, it's like, I basically would imagine Colossus representing Russia and everything that Russia would do in World War I or II. And it's like basically that, where it's like if the country were distilled to one hero that represents them. And
the X-Men are a good example of that sentiment of trying to do that thing like that. I would say that would be like a successful version of that, of what the Global Guardians are trying to do. But they just didn't have a ton of appearances. Like I don't remember them. I don't know to what extent their Global Guardians series is, and there's someone out there who's much more knowledgeable than I am of that. But
yeah, it'd be interesting to learn. Oh, what do you know? I'm seeing it. This is the first appearance of the Global Guardians. So I would also guess, without knowing for sure, I would guess that E. Nelson Bridwell was like basically bringing some of that whole Super Friends challenge of the Super Friends worldwide nature of the Super Friends into Earth One anyway. And so we get the Global Guardians, which is a great excuse for Superman to travel around the world. And in each country he goes to, he meets the appropriate person, which is what brings us back into this issue, as some of these villains that are trying to raise this wizard are attacking Israel. So when there's evil in Israel, who's Superman going to team with? His buddy, Chaim Levon, the Seraph. There's mysticism afoot also. So once again, Superman. I love these team-ups where Superman's basically like, yo, Seraph, you're my bro. You're super strong like me. You can help. And also, I don't do so well with magic. Help me out here.
Right. Or usually he needs like Batman to help him with magic, or a magic person like Wonder Woman or Constantine or something. But here, there's one guy
one guy, the Seraph, who on page 4, the narration mentions Seraph's usual tools: his mantle of Elijah, his staff of Moses, his strength of Samson. What am I missing?
You got them all.
Perfect. They encounter Ashtaroth and Moloch, which are supervillains here, but listeners who are somewhat familiar with either Tanakh or Jewish mythology may be like, oh, those are interesting. Indeed, Moloch is a foreign deity in the Tanakh. God often forbids the worship of Moloch.
Yeah, the character of God in the Bible, in the Tanakh, hates Moloch. Like,
yes, absolutely.
One of his top supervillains, like top
100%. Like, definitely
don't worship Moloch. Do not.
Greatest rivalries, God and Moloch. Do not worship. Yeah. Because Moloch is often associated with child sacrifice. And as we know from the Binding of Isaac, the Akedah, as troubling as that story is, ultimately the message is like, never sacrifice your kid. Do not do
that anymore.
And like there are indications in other places in the Tanakh of child sacrifice happening. Like arguably even Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's sons, getting consumed by the strange alien fire might be a form of child sacrifice in a certain way.
Hadn't thought about
sacrifice. That was someone had told me about. I think Meir Shalev has a book called Rishonim, or maybe it's Reshit. But it's like all about first of the Tanakh, and so it's looking at sacrifices. Anyway, that's a tangent. But the point being, Moloch, child sacrifice, don't do it. And Ashtaroth is mentioned a few times throughout Nevi'im, either as this foreign goddess you're not supposed to worship, usually associated with Baal, or as like a collective term for inappropriate or illicit worship.
Yeah, Baal's the other one that God in the Torah doesn't like. God hates Baal.
Right. So like, Moloch and Ashtaroth teaming up, it's like, this is God's greatest enemies teaming up.
It's like when Lex Luthor and Joker team up.
Right. So Solomon in 1 Kings 11:5 also, Solomon goes after Ashtaroth. So like there's a lot of connections here. On page 5, these supervillains reveal that they did intentionally name themselves after these deities. And we see that Moloch has a burning touch, which we can only assume is a tribute to the fact that he would burn children as part of human sacrifice. On page 6, Ashtaroth uses a moon spell against Seraph, who responds with what I think is my favorite curse I've ever heard. Right? Like, he's so thrown off that he responds, Joshua's shofar. It's just like,
I wonder if anyone ever said that again.
Joshua's shofar?
Yeah.
I mean, you and I are going to bring it back. We're making it happen. The moon spell ends up blinding Seraph, and he describes that he is as blind as Samson in slavery, which is a reference to, we talked a little bit about the Samson story last time. Samson is an utter fool for Delilah, who the Philistines asked Delilah to find out Samson's weakness. And even though Delilah says multiple times, what's your weakness? What's your weakness? And Samson would lie and come up with different ones. And then he'd be attacked in whatever way he'd said. So clearly he must have known Delilah was putting the words on. One day he finally tells her that his hair, right, because of his Nazirite vow, is the source of his strength. His hair is cut. The Philistines take him, they capture him, they blind him, and they turn him into a mill slave. So we once again have a Tanakh reference. But I don't know, Sarah's saying he's as blind as Samson in slavery. It's a little clunky, but it works better for me than the Oksner ones did.
It's also it's a little insensitive. I mean, I think they gouged Samson's eyes out or something. Really horrible.
Really did. Yeah, yeah. It was pretty. It was
you're
pretty
not
bloody.
as blind as Samson, Seraph. Come on.
Right. Fair point. Seraph is maybe exaggerating a little.
It's a little dramatic.
His favorite,
Seraph.
His favorite historian, Josephus, is being dramatic. Wildly enough, that's it. The issue goes on. There's Moloch and Ashtaroth get what they were looking for, but when it comes to Jewish content, Zehu, that's the end of it. And
they also get what's coming to them,
which is,
well, eventually. I mean, I assume eventually Superman and Seraph are going to win.
Yeah. What's weird about it is that this issue is a two-parter, I believe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't think neither Ashtaroth nor Moloch appear again.
Right.
They're listed as this is their single and only appear. So the big bad gets stopped, but these people never, they literally never appear in a single other comic.
Right.
It's really weird.
It's weird. Yeah.
We don't need to go into the full details. That's basically the end of Seraph's appearances for a decade. We're going to talk just very quickly. A decade later, in 1992, there's an issue of Justice League Quarterly number 8, which it has multiple stories. One of them is the real return of the Global Guardians, this is who Seraph's associated with now, is the Global Guardians. So in an issue written by Kevin Dooley.
Yeah. Kevin Dooley, drawn by Andy Smith. And Smitty was the inker.
Cool. We get just a very brief moment where Seraph is asked, why even bother being a hero? And his answer is, not necessarily explicitly Jewish, but heavily suggested more than just implied. He responds, why is he a hero? My people, my religion. It's my duty to bring peace. But you're right. For all our powers, we cannot change the stupidity of hate. Mm-hmm. It makes me wish that he had said Judaism instead of just my people, my religion.
Right.
But I like the fact that if you know Seraph, his people and religion are Jewish.
Right.
So the Jewish duty to bring peace. I like
it's
that.
Close.
Yeah. And then a couple pages later, he uses the staff once again and says, may the staff of Moses reveal all. And
because a key component of Seraph's personality is listing his toys.
Yeah.
He's very proud of these things.
He's very proud of these things. That is basically literally it. Obviously, the 1992 appearance means that was his appearance post-crisis.
Right.
He appears a couple other times with no Jewish content, and he's basically gone until once the DC universe ends in 2011 and restarts with the New 52, there's no Seraph, there's no appearances, there's no mentions. He basically doesn't seem to exist anymore.
Also, when the DC universe disappears the first time in 1985, when he's not really mentioned other than we just talked about. Yeah, but I'm saying other than this, that's it.
Right, we're right. He's very rarely mentioned or used. I mean, he got replaced by Ramban, right? He got market corrected, I guess might be the term.
Yeah.
Until In 2018, in May, in an issue of Doomsday Clock, which was the highly anticipated, but I think since it came out like more of a bust than a success, I would say.
It came out like it took like 3 years for the whole thing to come out. It took forever.
Right. People got exhausted by the art delays, but Doomsday Clock was a massive DC crossover that was essentially a sort of sequel to Watchmen, because it was the crossover of DC superheroes and Watchmen characters.
I think they wanted it to be that, but it ended up being not a crossover and more its own thing. It was like sort of a limited series maxi series. As
someone who only occasionally reads DC, I enjoyed it. I thought that there were some fun characters in it. But similar to Watchmen, it was written by Jeff Johns, and Jeff Johns, as an ode to Watchmen, would bring really intense back material to every comic, meaning after every issue, there would be, like newspaper clippings or website copy about things that had happened in the world, providing greater context of what's going on. And so,
like some DC Universe deep cuts, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in issue number 5, there's a list showing like a map of the globe and showing metahumans around the world, because there's a lot of concern over the metahumans in the US specifically. And so it lists that one of the groups of metahumans that are known are the Chayot in Israel. We know the Chayot. These are Ramban and Judith and Golem. Right? Like all of these characters that we came to really love in our Ramban episode, coming out of Suicide Squad and then Ostrander's Spectre series, right? So it lists the Chayot as we know them, but there's now one more member, and that member is Seraph. Seraph is actually listed as the leader of the Chayot, which, like, boy, if ever there was a line of text at the back of an issue that I was desperate to actually see the issue written out. Like, I'd love to, like, yes, I want Seraph and Ramban interacting. Yes, I want to see that group. And I have to take it back. There's not just one new member. There's a second new member. It also includes Pterodon, who apparently is an Israeli soldier that was transformed into a human pterodactyl in New Teen Titans Volume 2, number 24. I don't think there's any Jewish content, but I love that concept. Why is there an Israeli turned into a pterodactyl?
And Jeff Johns even gives Seraph a little like character bio in here.
Yeah.
At the end of it, and he says Seraph is the controversial Israeli metahuman known as Seraph, claims to wield the staff of Moses, the mantle. I'm not going to read it on. But why does he say controversial? Like, it's not like he's Sabra or something. He's just quoting the Bible all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I would assume that, it's been a while since I've read Doomsday Clock. Like, weren't metahumans in general just like, sort of controversial?
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Does it say anything about any of the others?
But they're referring to him as, they're saying, okay, so I'll just read it, fine. After he lists all his toys. Leader of the metahuman group Chayot, Seraph has kept the true number of his teammates a secret. It is rumored that the 3 most powerful metahumans on the planet are members of Chayot. However, there is speculation that this is a little more than propaganda created by the Israeli government. So maybe that's why he's controversial.
Right. I was going to say both of those sound like something the Israeli government might do.
Right. It's Dybbuk, Golem, Judith, Pterodon, and Ramban, and Seraph. So, somewhere out there in the multiverse, it's just waiting to be written. There is something with Seraph and Ramban interacting, much like I wished for in the last episode.
Greg Rucka, if you're listening, please write this. Even just
a while since we've mentioned him.
Yeah. Well, I can't think of anyone else I would trust to be able to do it well,
Right.
Bendis would write a silly version of it, but yeah.
Well, Bendis would be good for like the dialogue of the two of them, like on whatever ship they're going to, flying to their mission, like having funny banter or something. But yeah. Anyway,
Henry, that is the end of Seraph. So as we always do, like, any final closing thoughts on Seraph as a character?
It had a great high of like one of the greatest things I've ever seen, to not necessarily a low, but just okay. it was kind of it sort of left me a little unfulfilled at the end, because it just doesn't seem complete. Like, I don't know, there should be more appearances of this guy. Also, I think while I appreciate the accuracy to which the biblical references were created, I think having a character whose only Jewish references are biblical references it's a little lacking. There's like more to a Jew than just referencing the Bible. I mean, most Jews wouldn't even be able to do that. So,
right.
Yeah.
There's good reason that the issue we loved most, Super Friends 38, did involve more than just the Bible, right? It involved God's
praying.
voice.
That's rabbinic.
It involved Yom Kippur. It involved a tallis and a kippah, and it involves a lot of visual and ritual markers of Judaism. It felt richer for it, not just, I think, because you and I have more of a love for those aspects of Judaism, but it just felt like he was part of a richer tapestry of Jewish life in that issue. Right. Whereas the fact that he just kind of hits biblical references over and over in most other stories, it falls a little flat, right? It's like, right. What is the formula to a Seraph story? Something involving the development of Israel and Seraph being there, and then a bunch of biblical references, and like wash, rinse, repeat, wash, rinse, repeat. Right. And so that just kind of was unfulfilling versus the very vibrant issue number 38. And I think I agree with you that overall, most of the issues were fairly meh, but number 38 is probably going to be a new highlight that I use when I talk to people about this podcast. When I tell people, can you believe that this exists within the panels of a comic book?
Yeah.
One of the aspects I'm going to lean on to share with people is going to be in like 1980. There is an incredible depiction of Kol Nidre and Yom Kippur. That's like really early for everything else we have found. Like that's what's amazing, is that it's not just such a beautiful depiction of Judaism, but it's such an early depiction within the timeline we've discovered of Jewish content in comic books.
I wish we could see more of him.
Me too.
It's probably not going to happen, but...
Well, that's another character in the podcast books. Will be hopefully coming at you soon. We've got a few more that we're looking at that we're excited about. But until next time, I'm Brandon Bernstein.
I'm Henry Bernstein. No relation.
Thanks for listening. You can follow us at Jewish Comics Pod on Facebook and Twitter, or you can email us at jewishcomicspodcast@gmail.com. Please don't forget to give us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, and you can hit the subscribe button if you haven't already.